Hello, welcome, bonjour, bienvenue, Kwe Pijashig, Gina Wilson Indigenous, and I am a grandmother. I'm Algonquin, and I'm the Federal Deputy Minister of Diversity and Inclusion and Youth. I'm also the co-chair of the National Action Plan Core Working Group with my colleague, Valerie Royal, and I'm your co-host today. I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe, and I'm acknowledging from the Algonquins all of the traditional territories where you are on, First Nation, Inuit, Metis, and the homelands you're on. Nous sommes ici aujourd'hui pour lancer le plan d'action national.
We are here today to launch the 2021 National Action Plan for missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people.
The National Action Plan to end violence against Indigenous women, girls, and 2SLGBTQQIA plus people. We welcome all of you grandmothers, mothers, daughters, sisters, aunties, cousins, friends, and Two-Spirit plus people, the families and survivors. We welcome those who undertook the work involved in the national inquiry in missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, the commissioners, the staff, the elders, who all took part in this critically important work of truth-telling. Nous souhaitons la bienvenue aux organisations autochtones, aux familles et aux survivants.
We welcome Native organizations, families, and survivors, as well as Native, federal, provincial, and territorial governments who all got together to launch this National Action Plan. I would like to welcome the very Honorable Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, as well as to all speakers with us today.
And all our speakers here today. Valerie?
Good morning. I'm honored to be with you all here today, and I'm coming to you from the traditional territory of the Qulliq First Nation, the Ta'an Council in Whitehorse, Yukon. My name is Valerie Royal, and I'm the Government of Yukon's Deputy Minister of the Women's Directorate, the Department of Tourism and Culture, et la sous-ministre de la Direction des Services en Français. Together, Gina Wilson and I have had the privilege of co-chairing the National Action Plan Core Working Group, who, with members from all the committees, led the development of the National Action Plan. I acknowledge and offer thanks to Qulliq Diane Longboat, who will be keeping a sacred fire throughout this virtual event. I would like to remind everyone that if you need health supports during the webcast or at any time, support is available through the Hope for Wellness helpline at 1-855-242-3310 or through the online chat at hopeforwellness.ca, which is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We would now like to take a moment in silence to remember and honor the missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and gender diverse people who were and continue to be so cruelly taken from their loved ones. And we want to acknowledge all the students of every residential school in Canada, those who survived and those who never came home.
Thank you, everyone. Merci. I now want to welcome Grandmother Marie Ballantyne from the National Families and Survivors Circle to open us up in a good way. Marie?
Am I on mute? Good morning, Francis. Kinanas komit na kahitiraw. Mapanatang tisiligason maski mahihan tutim. Welcome to the land of the 2SLGBTQQIA Nation. I'm situated in Thompson, Manitoba with a unit. We're in Treaty Land number 5. I hope I'm correct on that number, but I'm here to say a prayer so that good things come out. Creator, we ask you for your sacred blessing for all the survivors and families of MMIWG. We pray for positive outcomes today. We pray for everyone that has worked so hard to bring our voices into the National Action Plan in a good way. We pray for the decision makers, Creator. We ask for these requests in a humble manner by following the 7 natural laws for a better understanding in addressing the gifts of life for all humanity. Creator, we thank you for the gift of life today. We pray for healing for our First Nations. We pray for all survivors and their families, plus others that have been affected. We pray for our frontline workers, Creator, our medicine people, and our ceremonial people. We pray for the 215 children that went to the spirit world. We pray for a positive outcome in terms of this milestone in seeking a better understanding of the national plan. And we say, Igosani, all elders, all fire keepers, and all that are present for this meeting. Kinanas kumit nawaw, kapia pigota, ipigagwin sito tamagis nano, tanso mais padik ipmatsiwin. We are here today to come to this table, to have a good understanding, to be able to understand the purpose of this work, and to handle it and meet with it in a good way. Mikusani, midukisikansik. Have a nice day.
Ikusi, Kokam, Valentine, Chmiigwech. Now I'm going to turn to Alder Mika Qulliq. Mika, you're next.
Kuya na miklo, ilagi yaw titaw nakama. Taima, kullaga iking musuk kako. Ikilaw ninni, o kakalo nga, kinaw ninni. Ilaw bang mika kakulo. Nuna bumi, nuna kakalwak tong ilama nga. Nula magama.
I am originally from Nunavut. I am residing in Ottawa, Ontario for 8 years now. I will be doing the opening lighting of the Qulliq regarding this opening of, I will speak on behalf.
I'm originally from Nunavut. I moved down here to Ottawa 8 years ago. As I'm lighting my Qulliq, I'll be saying a little bit about what the National Action Plan, the meeting for today, about the women, girls who never came home, and still those who are still missing.
I will light up the lighting of the Qulliq now. I'm adjusting the camera so you will be able to see the Qulliq. In memory and with our deep thoughts, and will not forget the women and girls, especially the children of 215 bodies that were found. It has impacted our mind. And for the purpose of this meeting, that this event is happening, and it coincided with 215 children that were found in Kamloops. I am myself as a residential school survivor.
Those girls, young girls, kids, especially those kids, 215 kids, and I'm sure there's many more who have been missing, who have been in a dark place for a very long time, and that to guide them, to guide their beautiful souls, and also to remember their families, especially their mom and dads, their grandpas, grandmothers, their families. It's just sometimes when you think about it, I think I'm one of the lucky ones because I'm a survivor. When you're just thinking about it, it's I'm I'm lucky. I'm here today. I survived the residential school, and when I think about it, which they never made it home. So this light is going to them. This light will heal them, and this light will take them where they want to be. We all want to be in a safe, beautiful light place, peaceful place, so that they'll somehow will never be forgotten, and somehow to able to live or rest peacefully. Tana
I am dedicating this to the light to the residential school survivors, and especially those children that were found recently. This is dedicated to the survivors and the ones that have gone. This light will be the light of the darkness, and we will no longer live in the darkness. Let the flame continue. And this is
for those who we are remembering today.
thank you that I am able to open this meeting.
For this very special meeting. Tema.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Qulliq, for lighting the Qulliq. I'd now like to welcome Elder Mani Chakabi. Mani?
Bonjour. Bonjour. Manish Kaba Indigenous.
Good morning.
And I'm Kiwi Kwadang Dunji. I'm making do them. Nisha Jack Gwendon and a key. May she be moved to any be mad soon. When I do, Kagagwajaman Juichish Nan to back in a man away gawe Kagi Gang. Jimam Quen among the dog when okay. Kagi Machawa King. Quewak. Skini Gizak. Mino at the Shabinochik. At the snow gagi me kawaga net the watch gwen or cabanochik. Ni jacos nana metashinan and gimme kawaga noak. We just nam wedge mam quenaming dog agima jawach. Chibino and guitar the shma. At the shabueno gagi. Kayakasi watch. You were cool with Kaichagate. Jotapinaman. Nino and the Chinamashko is young, Nietzsche and Schnabe, Gavino, Chimino Yawach, Chuichi Tiang, Ega Jacques Young, Kenneth Shuma, Gaman and the Moatre guys were Bakoma King. Which is Nam Jamashko is young. We know Agua and Okapinujuk, Ikushkuziwak, Wiki Wewa Gajitawach, Negoanok, Nijakons, Dashinan and Gajagatek. Wiki Wewa Gajitawach. Which is nam das Nino automatic back the man to reach. Just when I'm in the young, can I get one away, guys? Where I come back in. Bonjour, my name is Manisha Kabe. I live in Thunder Bay. I am Beaver Clan, and I'm also a Two-Spirit elder. I work with the youth and the young. We've been working together. I've been working with these people for about 39 weeks. I think we've been doing this job, working, coming together. I asked the Great Spirit to help us to open this day, this moment that we are going to be talking about and what's happening today in our celebration launch. They call it the launch. But I also want to bring a prayer right now before we do all that. To remember we are here for a good reason. And also we are here to help one another, to listen to each other. Great Spirit, I ask you to guide us today, what we are going to do today, to help us to remember the ones that we lost, the missing murdered women and young girls and young boys, and also to Spirit people that was taken away from our communities, the ones that went missing, and they're still missing, and they're still happening. Great Spirit, we ask you to give us the strength to do our work and also to help our families that are suffering, that have lost their families through this missing murdered women and children and girls and boys. Also, we want, Great Spirit, I ask you to guide us to remember the ones that have been found in BC, the 215 children, to bring them back home to their homeland. They have surfaced because they want to go home. They want to be back to their homelands. We also ask you to guide us and to help us to be strong, to heal our nation for what's happening in our community all across Canada. This is just the beginning of what's happening in our country. Great Spirit, I ask you to give us the strength, the courage to be strong for whatever is going to come. Also, Great Spirit, we ask you to help us to heal together. This is what we should be doing. Great Spirit, I ask you to guide these people that are supposed to be looking after us in Canada, our government people. Help us to heal our people across Canada. We need healing centers. We need to do something to heal ourselves and to heal other people and start living together. And remember, love is the only way that's going to bring us together and respect one another. I ask you, Great Spirit, to give us the strength to do what we're supposed to do. And I am representing the young people and the youth, and that's all they've been asking. When is the change going to happen? And I keep telling them pretty soon we'll come together. Miigwech for all of you people that are here today to listen to us and to listen to our books and to listen to the paper we have accomplished. Please read it, learn from it, and help us to work together in harmony. Miigwech, Kizagi Nimwinge. Thank you.
Miigwech Mani, and to all grandmothers, the elders, for today's opening ceremony and doing it in such a meaningful and beautiful way. Now I would like to turn to invite someone who has been on this journey with us, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, to say a few words. Prime Minister.
Hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. I'm joining you from the traditional land of the Algonquin people. We acknowledge them as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. Thank you, Gina, for that introduction. To everyone here, to all the speakers, thank you for being with us this morning. To the survivors and families, to the elders, representatives and commissioners, and to everyone involved in this work, your voices have been heard. C'est un honneur pour la ministre Bennett et moi.
It's an honor for Minister Bennett and I to be with you this morning. We are meeting today in a very difficult week. In recent days, we've been forced to recall the horrors of the residential schools.
Some have used words like unbelievable or unreal to describe the news that hundreds of children were found buried at the former Kamloops residential school. But for survivors, families, and communities, I know that this tragedy is all too believable, that the pain is all too real. To truly heal these wounds, we must first acknowledge the truth. And not only about residential schools, but about so many injustices, both past and present, that Indigenous peoples face. For decades, Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirit LGBTQQIA+ people across Canada have disappeared, suffered violence, or been killed. For decades, many of you have been calling for justice, healing, and concrete action to stop this tragedy. For decades, your voices have made it clear how our systems have failed you. When the national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls presented its final report, it called on us to work together to develop a national action plan to end systemic causes of violence. We accepted their findings, including that what happened amounts to genocide. Today, with the launch of the plan, we're taking a step forward together to make the transformative change necessary to end this national tragedy. To the survivors and families, we are so grateful for your leadership. We will continue to work with you to make sure your voices are heard and to end the violence and the abuse. To Indigenous communities across the country, our work as partners continues. I still have the sacred bundle that was offered to me 2 years ago at the inquiry's final report ceremony, and I've been taking good care of it. The inquiry's final report, swaddled in this traditional tichinagan, this cradle board, contains truths that Canada is no longer trying to hide. On that day, I made a promise that we would confront those truths and turn the inquiry's calls for justice into real, meaningful, Indigenous-led action. Together, that's what we have done and what we will continue to do. Aujourd'hui, ensemble, on lance le
Today,
plan
together, we are launching the National Action Plan that includes concrete measures to bring an end to violence against Indigenous women and girls. This is a necessary plan. It's essential. And this is a plan that will evolve across time and adapt to the specific needs of communities. In other words, the work doesn't stop here. On the contrary, as you've often said to me, there's a lot of work to be done, and I agree. On our side, the federal government will continue to roll up our sleeves.
The action plan is the result of 2 years of hard work and dedication from all partners involved: survivors, families, two-spirit LGBTQQIA+ people, provincial, territorial, and Indigenous governments, and Indigenous organizations. I want to thank everyone who is involved in this crucial ongoing effort. As part of this whole of government plan, our government is also releasing the federal pathway that outlines our commitments and contribution to the National Action Plan. Faithful to the themes in the National Inquiry's final report, the federal pathway is focused on 4 themes: culture, health and wellness, security and safety, and justice. Our pathway is a holistic approach to ending this national tragedy, and to implement it, we'll invest an additional $2.2 billion starting this year. This is part of the $18 billion in Budget 2021 to improve Indigenous people's lives and advance reconciliation. These investments are informed by the work we did together on the National Action Plan and the federal pathway to meaningfully respond to the specific and diverse needs of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. That said, I know there are no investments that can bring back the lives lost or that can heal people's pain. More education is needed. The truth must be told, and all Canadians must stand with Indigenous peoples against injustice. Le colonialisme, le racisme et le sexisme ont mené à des horribles
Racism,
tragédies.
sexism, prejudice have led to systemic injustice. These injustices continue to exist today. That must change. Today, we think about the victims that are no longer with us, the survivors, the families, the communities, but we continue to act. We continue to do that together.
To Commissioners Buller, Odette, Ailson, and Robinson, and all the courageous families, survivors, and partners who have charted the way forward to ensure that the Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit LGBTQQIA plus people will be safe wherever they live in Canada. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
Thank you.
Marcy. Nakumik. I'll now pass it back to Valerie.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I would now like to introduce co-chairs Hilda Anderson-Piers and Denise Pictou-Maloney to speak on behalf of the National Families and Survivors Circle.
Thank you, Valerie. I just wanted to acknowledge all our grandmothers who have started us off in a beautiful way today and to honor the sacred fire that's burning while we're doing this work, this important work, this sacred work. And I also wanted to acknowledge the Prime Minister for being present with us today and acknowledging the sacred bundle that he was presented at the National Inquiry closing ceremony. So I'm looking forward to the future on how we all collectively collaborate in ending all forms of gender and race-based violence. We are the National Family and Survivors Circle made up of Indigenous women and girls and gender diverse family members of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and 2SLGBTQQIA people and survivors of gender and race-based violence. We are from diverse communities, backgrounds, strengths, and capabilities, and use our expertise, lived experience, and agency to advocate for pathways that center families and survivors for transformative outcomes that end genocide. As families and survivors, we agree to participate in the development of the National Action Plan with the assurance this expertise would guide the identification of strength-based practices and actions to be in the plan. It is also groundbreaking to have so many partners working towards the common goal of ending gender and race-based violence against Indigenous women, girls, and 2SLGBTQQIA plus people. The establishment of our circle is historic, as is the level of integration of families and survivors in this type of co-development process with governments and organizations. It gives us hope that this will set a precedent for all paths forward. All future actions must keep families, survivors, Indigenous women and girls, and 2SLGBTQQIA plus central to decision-making, actions, and tracking success, and honor their legacy and expertise, honor their agency and expertise. At a virtual event yesterday with families and survivors, we released the National Family and Survivors Circle contribution to the NAP, which is entitled The Path Forward, Reclaiming Power and Place. It provides guidance on how to work with families and survivors as part of a standard practice going forward. In our contribution, we identify foundational calls for justice that are overarching and require immediate action along with the 4 rights areas of culture, health and wellness, human security, and justice. The implementation of every one of these calls for justice and resulting actions must be done with full inclusion of families and survivors. Foundational calls for justice require a range of actions from governments, institutions, and organizations, including complying with domestic and international legislation, such as UNDRIP, to restoring women and 2SLGBTQQIA+ people to their rightful place in decision-making. Indigenous women, girls, and 2SLGBTQQIA+ people are sacred and have the resilience, agency, lived experience to revitalize their communities through sustained access to culture, language, identity, and belonging. Every action outlined will only be effective with the proper financial supports of Indigenous-led initiatives that eliminates gaps and neglect. Profound and sustained political and institutional will must be demonstrated through concrete commitments and immediate action. With each day, the crisis worsens. More Indigenous women, girls, and 2SLGBTQQIA+ people go missing and are murdered. We cannot wait any longer. Immediate action is imperative and all governments must act now. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilda. Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge the elders and Mr. Prime Minister and Mr. Minister Bennett. And I'd also like to acknowledge, after I speak, that we do have a sacred fire here. And Mr. Trudeau, you just spoke about the sacred bundle that you're holding and the sacredness in that. And one of the things that families and survivors of MMIWG wanted to secure in doing this work, because it is sacred, was to make sure that it was grounded in ceremony. So as soon as I'm done speaking, we'll allow the elder to speak to the sacred fire. I first want to acknowledge, thank you 2 years ago when we handed that sacred bundle to you, and acknowledging what happened to our women and girls, and that what happened amounted to genocide. I think what we witnessed in this country this year, or this week, last week, was how urgent this work needs to be done, that this is all interconnected. We are the relatives of those 215 babies. And it impacts us deeply. The national inquiry offered an opportunity for families and survivors to unconditionally speak their truth regarding the systemic gaps in this country and gender-based violence that they experience as Indigenous women and girls and 2SLGBTQQIA+ people. I would like to acknowledge the families and the survivors and the commissioners that worked on the national inquiry: Commissioner Marion Buller, Commissioner Michelle Odette, Commissioner Kaya Robinson, Commissioner Brian Ailson, who centered us in ceremony for 2 years while we did this really important work. And the countless numbers of families and survivors who courageously spoke their truth, and that we continue this work as the National Family Survivor Circle in making sure that all families are engaged, that all families are centered in this process. Governments and institutions must be held accountable in repairing the damage caused. Our chapter calls for them to provide long-term, sustainable, and fully resourced infrastructure and support to Indigenous women and girls, 2SLGBTQQIA+ people, families, and survivors. With the release of the National Action Plan, we shine a spotlight on the immediate actions that need to be taken to implement the National Inquiry's calls for justice. However, the successful implementation of the NAP will require more than merely just checking off boxes to complete the calls for justice. We need accountability, inclusion, interconnectedness, and concrete actions that improve the lived realities of Indigenous women and girls and 2SLGBTQQIA+ people. The Circle's contribution to the NAP, or the National Action Plan, is guided by 7 principles for change outlined in the National Inquiry's final report, which are underscored by centering lived experience, especially the principles of decolonizing approach and inclusion of families and survivors. While our contribution identifies key goals and corresponding calls for justice, they require immediate action. We believe all 231 calls for justice are interconnected and inseparable. Transformative change through decolonization will only happen by recognizing the inherent Indigenous and human rights of Indigenous women and girls and 2SLGBTQQIA+ people. You know, I'll note that while this country locked down and stayed at home for a year, for our disenfranchised women who were suffering domestic violence, they didn't have homes to stay in. They lived out of their cars. They became victims. The numbers never stopped. So thank you for this time. And I would like to acknowledge the sacred fire and if we have time to allow Diane to speak to that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Denise. And I want to send warm and loving greetings to all of you today. My name is Gahandagwas. It means she's picking sweetgrass. And I say to you today, Sego Scano, Sewagwego, Ganalunquas, Sewagwego, Gahandagwas, Yunyats. I'm Mohawk Turtle Clan from 6 nations in the Grand River Territory. The fire that you see burning today was lit for the spiritual power that we need to envelop this work and all the families and all of the nations of our people on Turtle Island. This fire is burning in the lodge of Soul of the Mother at 6 Nations Grand River Territory. The lighting of that fire today honors the prophecy that in the time of the change in Mother Earth, that Mother Earth will release the truth about our people. The treasured ones, the 215, have been first to release the truth in their precious innocence. And today the women will follow and bring the truth to light. This sacred fire at Soul of the Mother connects to 7 living fires. And when I talk about spiritual power, I want you to understand that today is a day unlike any other days. This fire connects to the core of the fire burning within Mother Earth. That is her fire, where she stands each day praying for all of humanity and for all of creation to continue in a good way. The fire connects to our fire in this lodge. This lodge fire connects to the fire inside the grandmother moon. And this fire connects from the moon to our elder brother, the sun. In the heart of the sun is a powerful spiritual fire. That fire connects to the sky world, to the fires of our ancestors that are burning there, and to the Creator's council fire where the great ones are seated. That fire is now 6 that I mentioned. The 7th fire is your fire of your spirit. That sacred fire burns in every single human being. And when we make these ceremonies and when we make these prayers, the DNA light switches turn on in every human being to fulfill the laws of the Creator, to take care of each other and to take care of the earth. This is the 7th fire, which is the fire of your spirit. Today, we are witnessing the greatness of our nations to withstand genocide. No longer can the darkness of the soul of politics, lies, betrayal, and deceit find a domain in this country or abroad. There's a light shining from all of these sacred fires, from the core of Mother Earth to the council fire of the Creator in the sky world. This sacred fire and all fires are a direct conduit to the Creator. We are being watched for our beliefs, our words, our actions, and our commitments that we make to one another today. As First Nations, Inuit, and Metis women, we commit to working for the resurgence of our way of life, to light in prophecy that 8th fire of peace for all of humanity. We commit to birthing a new humanity of peace and respect, founded on a law of love. The Creator is our witness today, and the Creator is watching us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Elder. Thank you to the firekeepers, Hilda and Denise. Thank you and the entire National Family and Survivor Circle. I would now like to introduce Assembly of First Nations National Chief Perry Bellegarde and Louisa Hoosty-Jones, Women's Representative from British Columbia.
Go ahead, Louise. Thanking to our elders and knowledge keepers for grounding us and strengthening us for the work today. I am honored to be here today with you all to commemorate this work ahead. I acknowledge everyone's heart and dedication, and especially acknowledge families and loved ones, survivors, and longtime advocates watching today. Before I start, I want to acknowledge our collective grief following the discovery of the mass unmarked burial sites of the 215 children at Kamloops Residential School. I know many are hurting deeply and that we need to create space for our sorrow and for our healing. I sincerely hope that this will be the turning point for change, for action, support, and justice. My English name is Louisa Housty Jones. My traditional name is Qulliq. I come from the Qulliq Nation, located on the north coast of BC. I serve as an elected councillor for the Qulliq Nation. In my community, I have dedicated myself to supporting wellness, empowerment for our community members. I've been involved in facilitating the development of the Qulliq Women's Declaration and also organized my community to participate in the national inquiry. I am also the BCAFN Women's Representative and a member of the AFN Women's Council. The AFN Women's Council is participating in the development of the National Action Plan as a sub-working group. Throughout the spring and into the coming months, the AFN Women's Council is working with representatives from each region to engage directly with survivors and loved ones of those who have gone missing or been murdered, to hear how people would like to see the calls for justice implemented from their region. In BC, we concluded our final session on June 1st and will be presenting our final report and contribution to the First Nations Specific Action Plan and the National Action Plan on June 18th and 19th. The recommendation we have received so far have been incredibly valuable. I am extremely grateful for all those who participated in this process and shared their insight and lived experiences. I honor the courage, the strength, and the vulnerability that everyone brought to help move this important work forward. I honor the work that many are doing in their communities to end this tragedy and support families and loved ones. We have taken to heart what has been shared with us, and we will ensure that these important contributions from survivors and loved ones of those who have gone missing and been murdered are integrated into the National Action Plan as it continues to be developed. As the plan continues to unfold, we must see renewed commitment to action and transformation of the process so that it is more transparent, accountable, and representative. We have heard the need for immediate, coordinated, and well-resourced action that is led by Indigenous women and 2SLGBTQQIA+ people, and which has families and loved ones at the center. As grateful as I am for being here today, I know I'm not alone in my frustration. We have not seen swifter implementations of the calls for justice. This is a national tragedy, genocide, and ongoing violation of our human rights as Indigenous people. I call on everyone listening to recommit yourselves and your resources to ending violence against women, girls, and 2SLGBTQQIA+ people. We will not lose sight of the calls for justice. Let today be a catalyst for a plan which supports immediate and effective action and honors those who do the work. Thank you, Gayasika.
Istamina, Louisa, thank you. And askamon, can askom tenwa kakia no temptik no akomagnak. Ogimal piusio was sega seo. Kuskateo Moscus is skunigan ochinia Treaty 4 territory. Anamotainans manto can a smitnan and a skumtin. Algonquins Chianishna beck and askumtinoa. Ista my friends, relatives, just very quickly as well to thank Louisa for her words on behalf of the AFN Women's Council, acknowledging the elders for their prayers and for opening this up in a good way. I said one of my Indian names, King Thunderbird Child, and I'm from Little Black Bear First Nations Treaty 4 territory in southern Saskatchewan. And I acknowledge the Algonquin peoples I'm speaking from their ancestral territory lands here in Ottawa, by giving thanks to the Creator for this beautiful day. To Maria, Valentine, and Mika, and Mani, and Diane, thank you for leading in a good way. And to Gina and Valerie for your work. To Hilda and Denise for your work and your words. To the Prime Minister, thank you for your commitment for implementation of these MMIW calls to justice. And to Minister Bennett, thank you for your work as well. Our AFN Women's Council has been tasked with the lead for implementation of MMIW and the 231 calls to justice. So I lift them up. We wanted the women to lead this work, this very important sacred work. And I thank them for their energy and their efforts. I want to thank Elder Gwen Point for her work from our Elders Council, and Louisa for your words. And Chief Connie Big Eagle is the chair of the AFN Women's Council. So I want to thank her and lift her up as well for her work and guidance. I wanted to say our First Nations report that we're doing from our AFN as well is entitled Breathing Life into the Calls for Justice. So we're embarking on the next challenge in this important work, which will ensure that all 231 calls for justice are implemented and that the rights to safety and security for First Nations women, girls, and two-spirit and gender diverse people are upheld. It's been 2 years since the National Inquiry's final report, and the survivors and their families, they need justice and they need action. I'm happy to see, Prime Minister, that you're here today to show your commitment, because you did receive that bundle, that sacred bundle 2 years ago. And that's very important because this is sacred work. This is a duty. And the elders referred to how we're being watched by the Creator and the grandmothers and grandfathers. This is very important work. And I acknowledge you for your work and your energy and your efforts. And I'm acknowledging as well that the federal government has committed the 2.2 billion. And I always say it's progress, but progress doesn't mean parity. And so we have to keep working diligently for greater investments in education and training and housing and daycare centers, wellness centers, transportation issues, and how we end the violence amongst our communities and our people. I also want to say, as we go forward, First Nations families and survivors must be central to the implementation process and the accountability process. All governments and institutions, like the police, the justice system, the healthcare system, and educational institutions must all be accountable to the First Nations people they serve, and they must commit to implementing the calls for justice. And we know that change will not happen overnight. There are many factors that contribute to the tragedy of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and two-spirit and gender diverse peoples are complex, and will take years to unravel decades of colonial policies and the campaign of genocide against our people. But we are here today to commit to that work, to commit to that action, and to commit to stopping the violence against Indigenous women and girls, and the two-spirited and gender diverse people. Our people have suffered enough, and we need action. We need implementation of all these recommendations and calls to justice. My last points, we need to go beyond two very important things in Canada and move beyond these things that hurt our people. And we still feel the intergenerational trauma of the residential schools, which was a genocide. And we have to move beyond the Indian Act, the colonization and oppression of the Indian Act. So between those two things, we see examples in 2021 of how they affected our people. And it's reflected in the 40,000 children in foster care. It's reflected in the youth suicide rate, 5 to 7 times the national average. It's reflected in the disproportionate number of our children, our people in jails, women and men in jails, too high numbers. It's reflected in the overcrowded housing, in the poverty and the addictions, alcohol and drugs amongst our people, and family breakdown. That's the intergenerational trauma. And we need to work together, provide light and hope for our children and those yet unborn. And we can only do that by working together. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Louisa. Thank you, Chief Bellegarde. And we look forward to receiving the AFN's report later this month. Over to you, Gina.
Thank you, Valerie. I would like to now introduce Rebecca Qulliq, President of Paktuti Inuit Women of Canada, followed by Natan Obed, President of Inuit Tapirit Kanatami. Rebecca.
You're muted, Rebecca.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Udlakut Inukatika. Today, our thoughts are foremost with the family members of the missing and murdered Inuit, First Nations and Métis women, girls, and gender diverse people, and also survivors of gendered violence. As a residential school survivor, I'm also grieving with the families and communities whose children died at residential schools. Back in 2019, when the MMIWG inquiry report was released, I said at the time, safety for Inuit women is complex. If we are to deal with the root causes of violence, we must stop the cycle of discrimination and cycle of physical and sexual abuse. To do that, we need the full commitment of governments and communities. If we don't work together to implement Inuit-led solutions, Inuit women and children will continue to be in danger. Today, with the release of the National Inuit Action Plan, we now have the roadmap to address the gaping inequities and discrimination faced by Inuit and the roadmap to end gendered violence. The Inuit Action Plan provides concrete measures needed throughout Canadian society to give Inuit women, girls, and gender diverse people the same quality of life standards and outcomes as other Canadians enjoy. The action plan addresses 14 priority areas for Inuit women, girls, and gender diverse people, including shelters and housing, justice and policing, health and wellness, as well as economic security. The Inuit Action Plan also addresses the need to create conditions of safety, security, and well-being for Inuit women and girls and gender diverse people wherever they live across Inuit Nunangat or in the South. Tomorrow, we begin the work of implementing the Inuit Action Plan. For this Inuit Action Plan to succeed and end the tragedy of gendered violence, Inuit women must be at the forefront of implementation and monitoring of the plan's actions. Paktuti thanks all the members of the Inuit Working Group representing Inuit living both inside and outside Inuit Nunangat, who joined Paktuti and ITK in developing the Inuit Action Plan. We also extend our thanks to ITK President Obed and Minister Bennett, who are collaborative leaders who valued the leadership and voices of Inuit women in all the work they do. Paktuti is committed to continuing to work with all levels of government and our Inuit partners to ensure GBA plus lens is applied to the implementation of all measures in the Inuit Action Plan. We are also committed to championing the voices of Inuit women at the national, regional, and community levels for implementation of this critical plan to end gendered violence for the benefit of all Inuit. Priyanami.
Hello, good morning, everyone. First, I'd like to thank Mika Kakudlu for your opening and to all the elders here today for your thoughtful words. Thank you to President Kadlu for your leadership of Pauk Duty in this area, and to the 4 land claims leaders who also have shown their support. I also want to recognize all Indigenous leaders here as a part of this work, and just also recognize the Prime Minister, Minister Bennett, and any elected provincial or territorial representatives here today. I thank you for joining us to receive the product of this work, which is a demonstration of our collective ambition for ending violence against Indigenous women, girls, and 2SLGBTQQIA+ people. I especially want to recognize the Inuit women who have represented these organizations around the table. You've carried this responsibility with courage and great care, and I thank you all for that. I'd also like to recognize the work of all contributing partners in the development of the National Action Plan. Your work has been tireless and tough, and we honor your commitment and determination. This week has been particularly heavy, as we have been reminded yet again of atrocities and genocide that Indigenous peoples have been forced to endure in Canada. There are over 4,000 known cases of murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. There are over 6,000 documented cases of deaths in relation to residential schools. And this larger picture gives us that perspective that we need to push through and make sure that we make a difference in all that we do. The systemic inequities that perpetuate the harm and violence experienced by Indigenous women and girls and all Indigenous peoples must end. Today marks a significant milestone in our collective response to the families, survivors, and loved ones who shared their raw and heartfelt stories with the National Inquiry. All that we do is based on the foundation of that tough work and those stories and the voices and the power that came from the inquiry and the calls for justice. The Inuit chapter alone, which is being released today, contains 187 actions that must be undertaken by federal and provincial and territorial governments and by Inuit organizations. Inuit commit today to working with all levels of government in partnership to ensure the National Action Plan and the Inuit chapter are implemented fully. I call on you to accept this responsibility with humility and rigor and commitment, and that your bureaucracies do the same. This day is significant, coming exactly 2 years after the release of the National Inquiry's 231 calls for justice. We need not wait for another milestone to mark our progress. Every day is a day for action towards the implementation of this work. Nakumik.
Nakumik. Just want to thank you, President Kudlu and President Obed. Before we turn to the next speaker, I just want to make one clarification that the Assembly of First Nations report is now available, Breathing Life, and it has been released as of this morning. I'm now pleased to introduce Melanie Omeneho, President of Les Femmes Michif, MMIWG, Women of the Metis Nation, and then Clem Chartier of the Metis National Council. Melanie.
Good morning. I'm coming from you from the Métis motherland, as well as the homeland of Treaty 6. I want to thank all of you and honor the elders and the knowledge keepers that have been holding us in sacred spaces today and helping us to stay culturally grounded and strong and resilient. I want to even say that I want to acknowledge the elders that have worked with us in the last 10 months to help build this plan and to come forward to this day. We wish to honor the families of our missing and murdered for their strength and acknowledge their losses and the pain on the second anniversary of the national release of this report. We also honor our survivors of violence and acknowledge the trauma that they walk with on their journeys. We remain committed to bringing us all to a place of hope and healing. We want to thank the Prime Minister for his participation in our event today and for holding the bundle sacred that was given to him that contains the pains, the sorrows, and the stories of many of the families that were a part of the inquiry. We want to thank our Carolyn Bennett. I know that she's stuck with us throughout many challenging days and times here, and we understand that we really appreciate the fact that she has supported a distinctions-based need for solutions that will allow us to support and change the lives of the most vulnerable women and girls and gender diverse Métis people as we move forward into the implementation process. The journey to get here today to the release of the national plan to end missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and 2SLGBTQQIA+ people has been a long one. The development of this plan has been at times difficult, but through perseverance, commitment, and collaboration, a pathway has been defined. Our work has only just begun. This will take ongoing dedication, involvement, and commitment as we embark on the work of implementation. Pimsawak and the Métis Nation remain committed to working with all levels of government to end this tragedy and make lasting systemic changes throughout Canada. We want to thank our Métis Nation Working Group, our grandmothers, and our Métis Nation leadership for their support and committed actions to getting us to this day. The Métis Action Plan is called Weaving Miskatoha, which means change. It will be released and in the timeline that works best for the Métis Nation. This plan will lay out actionable changes that are required to specifically address the realities faced by Métis women, girls, and 2SLGBTQQIA+ people. This plan reflects the ongoing contribution of our Métis Nation Working Group over the past 18 months of collaboration, engagement, and co-development. The women of the Métis Nation know that we are stronger together. We anticipate working as a collective to ensure the implementation of the Métis National Action Plan is detailed in defining specific actions, tangible timelines, and responsibilities and accountabilities. Merci and thank you. And next will become Chartier, President of the Métis National Council. Thank you, Clem.
Thank you, Melanie. Good morning, all. Prime Minister, this has been a long time in coming. Many Indigenous peoples, including myself, have been severely impacted by the tragedies surrounding murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. It took us many years around the Council of the Federation table, calling along with other peoples for a national inquiry. Thankfully, with the election of your government, we were able to move ahead with that. We are grateful. We, through our previous few years working with you and your government, have come to a place of trust. We trust that you and your government will make every effort possible to move forward with respect to the National Action Plan. And for the Métis Nation, as President Omenuhu stated, because of circumstances, we felt that we needed to put in our own Métis Nation specific plan, and which, as President Omenuhu has stated, it's weaving Miskatoha. So we feel that moving forward, we need to do so on a distinctions basis, which of course you have embraced and which we fought for many years to also achieve. Due to our work experience with you, the Metis Nation and its leadership is prepared to continue down this path. But, and nevertheless, Prime Minister, in your statement earlier today, a comment that you made has resonated with me, and it's that it's been a difficult week. And yes, it has been a difficult week, especially in light of the gruesome discovery of the 215, young people, children, whose remains have been located, at the Kamloops Residential School. The Métis Nation, feels that same pain, for those children and other children who have met the same fate and experienced the same treatment in those, I guess, Catholic run in most cases or other religiously run institutions, many empowered and in fact paid for by the federal government. But you also stated that truth is necessary and that we have to learn from the truth. And Mr. Prime Minister, the truth is, and Minister Bennett can attest to this, the truth is Métis people, citizens of the Métis Nation also attended residential schools, Métis residential schools. I went to one for 10 years at Île-à-la-Crosse, and we believe we even suffered worse than the First Nations students that went to the one at Beauval, because there the federal government in fact provided money so that you could have proper food and you could have proper whatever it is that children need at those particular times. Whereas those of us that went to Île-à-la-Crosse, where we had to stay at the boys' residence within a yard that was about an acre surrounded by barbed wire fence, where we could only leave for meals and church and for school. We suffered greatly and we're still not being dealt with. And why is that? I was again in Île-à-la-Crosse just recently, and people are saying, well, why are we discounted? Is it because we're Métis? Why are others being dealt with and not us? So that's the truth. And that has to be dealt with. And, it's truly unfortunate. But with respect to this current issue that we're addressing, hopefully we will be included, as my comments have just shown, with respect to residential schools. The Métis Nation citizens and the schools they went to are excluded. The 60 school, our Métis children are excluded. Now we're being forced into the courts to try to resolve this when we shouldn't have to be in the courts. Métis are citizens as well, are human beings. We have feelings like everyone else, and we need to be dealt with. But in terms of the Métis Nation itself, I'm pleased to state that the Manitoba Métis Federation government has taken it upon itself to address this issue of murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, and has set up a $1 million fund called Bring Me Home, which is open to not only Métis Nation citizens, but to First Nations, Inuit, and in fact, non-Indigenous citizens. So the Métis Nation, at least the Manitoba Métis Federation government, is taking action to try to address this, and hopefully that we won't have to continue addressing it on our own, that at some point the federal government will step up and start dealing with us as well. So thank you all. And again, I look forward to a rapid implementation of the National Action Plan. It's something that we've been waiting for a long time. And I'm sure most families that have been affected will embrace it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Clem. Thank you, Melanie. Over to you, Valerie.
Thanks, Gina. I just want to make a further clarification on the AFN's report. Earlier, I had mentioned it will be out later this month. In fact, it's the BC regional report that will be out on June 18th. The AFN's report of contribution to the National Action Plan was released today. And now I'd like to introduce National Chief Elmer St. Pierre and Chief Lisa Cooper from the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples.
I come to you from my traditional ancestral homeland of the Mi'kmaq community on Prince Edward Island. I am the President Chief of the Native Council of Prince Edward Island. I am honored to be standing with CAP's Elder Diane Langley, as well as National Chief Elmer St. Pierre, to mark the second anniversary of the release of the final report and the announcement of the National Action Plan. I wish to extend my deepest appreciation to the family and survivors for putting their trust in me and for sharing their wisdom and direction. I feel honored and humble to carry your words forward. You and your loved ones are not forgotten. The release of the National Action Plan is not the end of the journey. It is only the beginning as we continue to work toward reconciliation and a transformative and barrier-free world for Indigenous women, girls, and 2SLGBTQIA+ peoples. I wish to thank my team, the sub-working group of the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples, and I look forward to the journey ahead. And I make a commitment today to continue to work with CAP's sub-working group toward completing CAP's National Action Plan. I'm also wearing the orange shirt today in honor of the 215 children that were found. Lalin, thank you, and I pass it over to National Chief.
Yes, thank you, Lisa. Quay, as the National Chief of the Congress of Aboriginal People, I am here today on the traditional and unceded territory of the Mohawk Nation. This is a very important day for us as we release our National Action Plan and to start moving forward for all of our Métis. As we talked to Minister Bennett, and a couple of times I've heard it from our Assembly of First Nation, Perry Bellegarde, that we can't leave anybody behind. We got to make sure that every one of our women right across this country is looked after, and that we stand up for each and every one of them. Before I go any further, I would like to take this time to that the Congress of Aboriginal People wants our brothers and sisters in British Columbia to know we are grieving with them and support the call to investigation of all sites of residential school. This tragedy, like so many others, is connected to our missing and murdered people. Today, the Congress stands with the grieving families that lost their loved ones. We wish to let the survivors know that we hear you and that the words of the Congress will be guided by your voice. Today, the Congress is releasing the interim report, which is the first step to the development of the CAP's National Action. I want to acknowledge the hard work and dedication of our core working group, our CAP sub-working group, particularly President Chief Lisa Cooper for her leadership. And she has really led this group together and held it together to this very day. CAP also like to send out a heartwarming condolence or appreciation to the families and the survivors and their words of wisdom and leadership. And I forgot something right at the very start. I'm sorry, but at this point, I would like to also thank our three grandmothers for their opening and setting this up in a good way. I'd like to thank the family circle as well. And I would like to, at this time, I would like to offer tobacco to the sacred fire for those 215 children that's out in British Columbia and to their families. Miigwech, thank you.
Thank you, Chief Cooper. Thank you, Chief St. Pierre. Really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
I would like to remind everyone that if you need health support during this webcast or at any time, support is available through the Hope for Wellness helpline at 1-855-242-3310 or through the online chat at hopeforwellness.ca. Gina?
Thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce someone who has been on this journey and a strong leader on this front for many, many years, the Honorable Jeannie McLean. Minister responsible for Women's Directorate, Government of Yukon, who is here today on behalf of all of the provinces and territories. Minister.
Thank you very much, Gina. Jeannie McLean Ushia. I'm from the Tahltan Nation. I am Wolf Clan. My people come from Telegraph Creek, but I'm absolutely proud, born and raised Yukoner, and I'm happy to be coming to you today from Whitehorse, Yukon, the traditional territory of the Kwanlundun First Nation and the Ta'an Pachon Council. As Gina stated, I am honored to be the minister responsible for the Women's Directorate in Yukon, but also the Minister of Education. So thank you so much for having me today. The provinces and territorial ministers responsible for responding to the national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls believe that everyone has the right to live free from violence. Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit LGBTQQIA plus people continue to be harmed by violence arising from racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and socioeconomic inequity, the frequency of which has increased with the onset of the coronavirus pandemic in 2020. We want to honor the families of missing and murdered loved ones in our commitments to work together and to collaborate with survivors, families, and people with lived experience in addressing the multi-complex and deeply rooted factors that contribute to violence against Indigenous peoples. We honor their resilience and strength they called for and will continue to contribute to building a responsive and Indigenous-led approach to ending endemic violence against Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit LGBTQQIA plus people in our country. We aspire to a future where Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit LGBTQQIA plus people experience equality, security, and respect in a violence-free Canada. We support the June 2020 joint statement on anti-racism and the January 2021 joint declaration for a Canada free of gender-based violence. We will ensure our respective responses to the national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls complement our collective efforts to address racism and gender-based violence. Provinces and territories work at the regional and community level with a broad array of Indigenous peoples, communities, governments, and organizations. The perspectives of these critical partners on what actions will be effective in addressing violence against Indigenous peoples will differ from the Canada-wide view as actions reflect each jurisdiction's priorities and perspectives. Diversity is one of our country's strengths. We will continue to work collaboratively within and between our jurisdictions with Indigenous governments and partners and with Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit LGBTQQIA plus people who have lived experience of violence. This will ensure the diversity of perspectives inform the foundation of the required changes to policies, initiatives, and practices that best address unique needs within our respective jurisdictions. The National Action Plan is one step on a journey through which provinces and territories may establish shared goals and priorities with the federal government and clarify areas of shared jurisdictional priorities, respecting the pace and priorities of Indigenous peoples and communities. Each province and territory is pursuing further dialogue and engagement with Indigenous partners on actions they have already taken, as well as those that will come in response to the national inquiry's calls for justice. Provincial and territorial governments and the federal government, Indigenous governments and partners, and all Canadians share the responsibility to lead the societal changes required to address these urgent and long-standing issues. We commit to building a solid foundation with our respective Indigenous partners to address the violence, racism, and discrimination faced by Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit LGBTQQIA+ people. Finally, the provincial and territorial ministers, as the provincial and territorial ministers, we commit to collaborating and encouraging all Canadians to be part of a future where Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit LGBTQQIA+ people live free of violence and discrimination. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Valerie?
Thank you. I'd now like to introduce Sylvia Maracle, Chair of the 2SLGBTQQIA+ group and Executive Director of the Ontario Federation of Indigenous Friendship Centres. Sylvia?
You're muted, Sylvia.
I've never heard so many people say 2SLGBTQQIA in my lifetime so far as we have today. Part of the work that our group has done to contribute to the national plan has been to begin to identify and promote an understanding, both inside our communities and external, about the erasure of Two-Spirited plus people. Sorry, apparently I'm having some technical difficulty, but I don't understand it.
We see you well there. If you can continue on, that's great. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So part of this is to understand that the erasure of Two-Spirited people has happened since contact, and that in itself is a tremendous form of violence. We have, as a group, addressed internal and external violence that we experience in the form of sexism, racism, homophobia, and transphobia. All of the people who've been involved in this process as part of this collective are ourselves Indigenous from across Canada. We all identify as part of the Two-Spirit community. We've all experienced personally gender-based violence. We brought that knowledge forward, and we did some extra work on addressing transgender in Indigenous communities and Indigenous Two-Spirit community members who are involved in sex trade. So our report is done. It is one of its kind so far in history. We're not sure it has ever been done before. And we are grateful to have had the opportunity and inclusion and the support of the groups who were involved in the National Action Plan and who are here. A great deal, I think, of cross-cultural understanding, of acceptance, of creating safe spaces where we could have the conversation occurred. It's important for us as we move forward to understand, as all of my colleagues have said, that there's an urgency that while we are sitting here and talking, the violence continues. I do want to take a brief moment to reflect on the people who are part of this process and who've been on the journey, and people who were part of the core working group who found who made sure that we felt loved as the Two-Spirited community, that we were involved and important, and who actually, in learning and understanding and being able to talk to each other, some of the healing began. So we would like to challenge all of you who are listening and encourage all of you who are listening to do more than read the report. The report is important, but we need to take today as one more journey, one more step in our journey. And thank you for creating the space for Two-Spirited issues to come forward. And thank you for allowing us to articulate them in our own way, in our own words. So thank you for listening to me. Donetto.
Thank you so much, Sylvia, and to your entire working group. Thank you. Your report is beautiful. Gina?
Thank you. And now for our final Indigenous speaker, before we hear from Minister Bennett, I would like to introduce Diane Redsky, Chair of the Urban Group and Executive Director of MMIWG. Diane.
Thank you. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging First Nation, Inuit, Métis, traditional territories that we all have the privilege of being on. I also acknowledge the elders and the sacred ceremonial items and the fire that are protecting and guiding us here today. It is undeniable that there is a vital, innovative, resilient, and strong urban Indigenous presence in Canada. The urban path to reclaiming power and place, regardless of residency, sets clear actions that are practical, realistic, achievable, and necessary to eliminate violence against Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit LGBTQQIA people. The Urban Sub-Working Group approached our work based on our decades of experience being in urban centers. We know what works and what's needed to address violence. To achieve this means fundamental transformation of systems and society so that the immediate and long-term impacts are both felt and seen in the lives of Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirited LGBTQQIA people today and in the 7 generations ahead of us. The urban approach to stop this genocide and to end gender and race-based violence calls for the end of the status quo, to shifting power, decision-making, and resources to support local and grassroots initiative, regardless of where you live. The solutions have always been where Indigenous people are. Those kitchen tables, boardrooms, around sacred fires and ceremonies, and in Indigenous-led organizations across the country. To bring this together means we must all work together. Co-development leading to co-management is critical to this success. To all governments, systems, institutions, allies, private and public sectors, the time is now. This is a new starting point. Our task to work together is urgent. We have a shared responsibility for this success. Our lives literally depend on it. To missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, Two-Spirited LGBTQQIA families and survivors, your voice has brought all of us here today and will continue to into the future. Urban Indigenous-led organizations such as Indigenous Women and Family Centers, shelters, 2SLGBTQQIA organizations, and friendship centers will continue to be guided by you. And wherever Indigenous-led resources don't exist, then let's change that. Thank you to all of those who led and participated in the national inquiry. Thank you to the powerful and strong urban Indigenous leaders on the Urban Sub-Working Group. We are indebted to the National Families and Survivors Circle and to the members of the core working group who have jointly developed the National Action Plan with us. This ongoing national tragedy brought us together, and there is a role and responsibility for everyone individually and collectively to be part of the solution. This National Action Plan gives us the pathway we need, not only to change things in the future, but to get started today. Miigwech.
Thank you, Diane. Val?
Before I introduce the next speaker, I also want to remind you that there is health support available that is specific to MMIWG. You can access that support by calling 1-844-413-6649. That's 1-844-413-6649. It's now my pleasure to introduce the Honorable Carolyn Bennett, Minister of Crown-Indigenous Relations, to say a few words. Minister Bennett.
Thank you, Val, and Qulliq, Qulliq, Tonsi, hello, bonjour. I'm joining you today from my home in Toronto on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, where we honor all of the Indigenous peoples who paddled these waters and whose moccasins walk these lands. I'd like to thank the elders for opening today in a good way and for those those elders that will close and make sure we carry the work through this day and in the weeks and years to come. I acknowledge the sacred fire and thank Gohun Takwis for your beautiful words, and to the fire keepers who make sure the fire burns bright. I'd also like to sincerely thank Deputy Minister Gina Wilson and Deputy Minister Valerie Royal for not only hosting us, but for your incredible leadership to get us to this day. We thank each and every contributing partner for their important work in getting us to a national action plan that will be effective and accountable. It is hard work, and we acknowledge it has been hard on the people doing the work. This week, the entire country has been deeply impacted by the revelations about the Kamloops residential school. Canadians now are confronted with the truth and the need to understand the ongoing effects of residential school system. Once you know the truth, you can't unknow the truth. It compels all of us to be part of the essential work of decolonization, healing, and reconciliation. We cannot ignore the devastating link between the large numbers of murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls and the legacy of residential schools. Many of the root causes of violence we see today can be traced back to the loss of culture, identity, family connections, and the child abuse perpetrated by the residential school system. For decades, I have been inspired and learned from the families and survivors as they sought justice and healing and demanded governments put in place concrete actions to keep Indigenous women and girls and two-spirited LGBTQQIA+ people safe wherever they are. To the families, survivors, and communities who fought for a public inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and 2SLGBTQQIA+ people, we are so grateful that you were able to turn your grief and loss into the advocacy that has taken us to this day. As a government, we vow to work with you to keep Indigenous women and girls and 2SLGBTQQIA+ people safe wherever they live, living and free from violence and indignity. The violence suffered by Indigenous women, girls, and 2SLGBTQQIA+ people is a result of years of colonial policies, laws, practices, and omissions, which eroded the historic power and place of Indigenous women and 2S gender diverse people. Its roots are systemic and complex. We acknowledge that the approach to addressing the root causes of violence must be responsive to the diversity of experiences of Indigenous peoples from coast to coast to coast. As part of the National Action Plan, we are releasing the federal pathway, the Government of Canada's contribution. The pathway, like the National Action Plan, is a living document that will be improved at regular intervals in order to be accountable for its effectiveness now and into the future. Working with Indigenous partners, organizations, and communities, we will ensure that appropriate monitoring tools are in place to define and measure progress. And with the support of the $20.3 million over 5 years from this year's budget, this includes clear benchmarks for progress, informed by reliable data and research through the robust data strategy that the data group has provided for the National Action Plan and the federal pathway. This is essential to being able to measure, adapt, and keep governments accountable now and in the future. We are truly grateful for the impressive work presented by the Data Working Group. The federal pathway responds to the 4 themes identified in the National Inquiry's final report: culture, health and wellness, human safety and security, and justice. The pathway takes comprehensive actions to address the socioeconomic root causes, including culture, languages, community safety, poverty, food insecurity, employment, education, health and wellness, infrastructure, housing, and quality of life for all Indigenous peoples. We are building on the foundation, laid in 2015 by our actions to launch the pre-inquiry and the investments since then in the 2020 fall economic statement and the 2021 federal budget. We, as the Prime Minister said, have proposed a historic investment over $18 billion over the next 5 years to improve the quality of life and create new opportunities for people living in Indigenous communities. This includes, as you've heard, the $2.2 billion over 5 years and $160.9 million ongoing to end the national tragedy of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and 2SLGBTQQIA plus people. In addition, initiatives through Budget 2021 will also address all root causes. We honor and lift up the National Family and Survivor Circle for their courage and their commitment and focus to get the work done to end the violence. They are ensuring nothing about us without us. Our work to end this national tragedy must keep the families and survivors at the heart of our work. The spirit of the loved ones they have lost will continue to guide us. We are grateful that the Family and Survivor Circle has agreed to continue to guide our way forward. Today is dedicated to the women and girls and 2S plus people we have lost, leaving their stories untold. To the women and girls and 2S plus people who have been abused, violated, and silenced. To the women and girls and 2S plus people who speak up and speak out against the violence. In true partnership, based on their wise counsel, we are taking concrete actions to end the violence against First Nations, Inuit, and Metis, women, girls, 2SLGBTQQIA plus people. We can do this. We have to. We will not let you down. Tomorrow, we begin the work of implementation. Miigwech, nakamik, merci. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you for your obvious commitment, your leadership, and your passion for this hard work that is also, as I'm often reminded by AFN Yukon Regional Chief Kluwani Adamak, heart work. And that's what it means to work together. Thank you. So this concludes our speakers for today. In closing, we acknowledge all families and survivors. Our work is guided by your voices. We will always remember. We will continue working with you in partnership to ensure Indigenous women, girls, and gender diverse people are safe no matter where they live. The spirit of your loved ones will continue to guide us forward. For the media who are here, there will be media availabilities organized by some partners in the coming days, and there is also contact information in the news release. And to close us off in a good way, I would first like to invite Dr. Gwendolyn Point for a closing prayer.
Te ia talato mokwa, te ia talato tetel e tiaias. Shashkoa te hommel te squee, and halkamel de hommel te stalo. Little bird de hommel te squee. My traditional name is Shashkoa. The language I speak is Halkamelimko, and I'm Stalo here in what they call the Fraser Valley in Lower British Columbia. I also carry the name Little Bird, and it's never meant so much to say my name, my traditional name. Te ia talito, siam te siaya te slauta. To our leaders, National Chief Perry Bellegarde. To our leader, Justin Trudeau. I say thank you. To it, this means thank you, but it also means welcome. And I welcome this day. I give thanks for this day. to Deputy Minister Gina Wilson, Deputy Minister Valerie Royal, for looking after us today, for guiding this day. This is what courage looks like. This is what hope looks like. I give you thanks for carrying this work out with our ceremonies, one of our ceremonies, that sacred fire. The elders would stand us by a fire in our longhouses. And you had to earn the right to speak. You couldn't just speak. You had to earn that right to speak and to stand by that fire. One of the hallmarks to be able to speak was to be a grandmother. So I give thanks to my grandchildren that I get to spend time with today. One of our elders this week, our knowledge keeper, our regional chief, Norman Yakalele, looks after our knowledge keepers across Canada. He said a lightning bolt has hit and released our children, those 215 souls, our children. And it's a lightning bolt. Thunderbird here releases that lightning bolt. And it's a wake-up call to Canada again. So I give thanks for those dear children, 215 of them. Thank you to our dear elders that started us with prayer. We say ATIs, Tetzel, ATIs. It's a good work that I've witnessed today. And work for us is not a verb, it's a noun. Our work that we do is sacred. And that work was covered. And it's now being held by our Prime Minister. The work we do in a good way, in a prayerful way. That's why we're still here. I give thanks for each one of you, and I'm asking blessings for each one of you that have walked in this journey. We say etamad etathala, huamtamad the huamtathala tashkolawan. One mind and one heart. A strong mind and a strong heart tashkolawan in a good way. What does that mean? Is to stand up and do what you need to do in a good way. That's what I witnessed here today. As we began in prayer, as we begin this next chapter, as we begin to walk together, in the words of Chief Sitting Bull, continue to put your minds and your hearts together to create a good future for our children. Has never meant more. I thank you again for your good work. Each one of you, from the different communities, from the different levels of government. And Carolyn, thank you. Carolyn, Bennett, thank you. If we say what we say and do today creates our future, then we're creating that safe future. Qulliq is a person. There's no distinguishment between a man and a woman, a child. Qulliq sets us apart from the ones that fly, the ones that swim. The four-legged. My grandmother said, or my grandfather said, cut your arm, make a cut, we'll all bleed the same. So to Talto, I'd like to special blessing on each one of you, special blessing on the work. And I'd like to do this through our song that came to our Stolo people through one of our leaders. When our sweat lodge came back. And this song, again, to bring the minds and the hearts of all of you together to carry on with your good work, encourage you to carry on. Our elders said, don't get tired. Don't feel sorry for yourself. You stand up straight, you stand up tall, keep your eyes on where you're going. And again, thank you to each one. I'm asking you to accept the blessings, each one of you to accept the blessings. Far too often we give and give and give and we don't know how to receive. So I'm asking special blessings on each one of you, your families, your nations, special blessings on our Tecumseh people and families and those 215 children. And I do this as we say it's our Stalo anthem. It's like O Canada, but Stalo style. High tip. Safe journeys. High tip.
Thank you, Dr. Point. I would now like to invite Elder Diane Langley to offer her closing prayer.
Quay. My name is Diane Langley. I am a Mi'kmaq grandmother, speaking to you from my homeland, Mi'kma'ki, land of the rising sun, which includes Nova Scotia, most of New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and Cape Breton Island. I'm a member of the Native Council of Nova Scotia and the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples, centered in Ottawa, that serves all of Canada. Members from both groups live off reserve. 70% of the Indigenous people in Canada include members who are status, non-status, Métis, and Inuit, and live off reserve. I choose to tell a history tale I learned from hereditary chief of the Mi'kmaq Grand Council, Stephen Augustine, in the hope it will give you an understanding of what we believed. Our culture was based on sharing and looking after each other. No one went hungry. The strong hunted and fished, and everyone was fed. Any extras were dried in the sun or salt cured and stored away for the winter months. Winter fires in the longhouse kept everyone warm, and goose meat or other meats hung from the center pole. All could dip bannock or luskan Mi'kmaq bread into the drippings, and everyone shared, so no one was hungry. It points out with today's happenings how and why we were deceived by other cultures and their values. Vikings arrived in 1600 AD looking for fish. Then the Basque and the English and French arrived. They wanted more than fish. They wanted the land, the trees, and to make permanent settlements. They cut all the trees back to build their forts, and when winter came, they had no protection from cold and wind or their enemies. They never thought ahead, therefore freezing. They moved their stuff to Port Royal and went back home. When they arrived back, they found everything was there for them. We had no reason to take anything. We had our wigwams and our shared way of life. Like the old poem, toss a pebble in the water, just a splash and it is gone. But ripples go on and on. Myself, I hope 100,000 circles of shared knowledge will travel on and on. Well, Aaron, thank you. I will close with a short prayer. Creator, with all the disturbing news we have heard this week, we realize that the missing and murdered have been just that for a very long time. While we put our efforts into finding our modern lost members, let us not forget those who have been missing and or murdered from the time of residential schools and all the anguish the families have endured by not knowing why their children never came home. We ask you to unite the last lost souls with their families so both can be whole again. We ask your support for today's search efforts. Help us to write the final chapter of all who are lost and missing, and may they too, with our help and yours, find peace. Creator, I ask you to let it be so. Tahoe. Willara.
Thank you, Elder Langley. Thank you for the story and thank you for the prayer. I would now like to invite Elder Kathy Boston for the last closing prayer.
Thank you, Valerie. Good day, everyone. My name is Kathy Boston. I am from Winnipeg, Manitoba, heartland of our Métis people. I would like to take this opportunity, first of all, to acknowledge all the strong Indigenous women from across this country who have dedicated so much time and energy into creating this national action plan. Your pride, your determination, and loyalty to this cause was so powerful. I'm sure at times cyberspace was distorted. And I am truly honored to have been a part of this process. I wish all of you much success and happiness, and thank you for all that you have done. I will now offer a prayer to our sacred grandmothers. Sacred grandmothers from all directions, we offer you our prayers today with love and respect. We are grateful for all that we have. We thank Mother Earth for her daily gifts. Today, let us hold in our hearts and prayers the 215 children found in Kamloops, BC. May their spirits find peace and love in the spirit world with our ancestors. Sacred grandmothers, thank you for your wisdom and guidance throughout the process of this very difficult task. We ask that you surround the survivors and families of our missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls with love and strength. May they find some peace knowing that their loved ones will always be loved. They will always be missed and they will never be forgotten. And we must never forget that the foundation of this plan was built upon the violent deaths of our loved ones. Moving forward, it is important that we never forget what we left behind. Sacred grandmothers, we ask for your blessings as this plan is put into action within our Indigenous communities. Let us do so with the determination that one day we'll have a life where our ways are accepted and respected, and we can all live in peace and harmony. Be kind and gentle to others, and may your days be full of much love and many blessings. Stay healthy and stay safe. Hi, hi, Marcy.
Thank you, Elder Boston. Before I turn it back to my co-chair, Gina Wilson, I want to say that it has been my honor and privilege to do this important work here in Yukon with the Yukon Advisory Committee and at the national level with the members of the core working group. Thank you all so much to all who supported this work and all who contributed to this work. It's important. It has just begun. Thank you, Gina. Over to you.
Final 15 seconds. Thank you, elders and all. We've done something great here today, women. Final reminder, please access health supports if you need to. Thank you to everyone who's joined us. We did go over time. Thank you, Prime Minister, for sitting with us, listening, reflecting, being part of this circle with the bundle entrusted to you. And miigwech to all the organizers and the workers, the officials, the employees, both current and past, who have worked so hard at this. We are so grateful. Goodbye, everyone. Au revoir. Majashin.